Hi class, welcome to Module 3 and the second week of class. You're entering the module required and we're looking at race and ethnicity this week. So as you start thinking about that, you've heard a great deal about the issues of race within the news, especially in the last few years. We've gone up and down, but this is a long history of issues related to race and the social problems that occur tied to them. So we'll examine those and we'll look at some of the solutions and try to determine whether they work or not. To look at that closer, I want to pull us over to the PowerPoints fairly quickly and go through them, and then we'll come back and look at what else goes on related to your module this week. Now, understanding that race is a group or population sharing the same set of genetic characteristics or physical features, that race is not biological. Interesting statement there, isn't it? There are some biological pieces that people point to on a regular basis, but in reality, DNA-wise, humans are one of the closest of any particular species. And to find someone closest to me genetically doesn't mean that they'll look anything like me. That DNA match that we need for the best for a transplant or for something, knowing where we're from, it it may guide us in that process. Those things, it will tell us where that process is. But that person to give me an organ could have a skin color and totally different than mine. Their noses and all the shapes of body parts that we determine race from could be totally different from the way I look or the same for you. As we look around a classroom, we don't have any idea who's our perfect match for blood and kidney and lung. Someone may easily match us. You see, race is a social construct. We'll come back to that in a minute. So race is a group or population with the set of genetic characteristics or physical features that seem to be alike. And an ethnic group is a group of people who are of some degree or another consider themselves these unique qualities and traits. So ethnic groups. I'm Danish. Can you tell that? Are there cultural traits tied to it? Yes. Danish language, oftentimes blonde, blue-eyed, certain things in our diet may come into place. I'm also part German. I've had foreign exchange students who say they ate more sauerkraut in my home than they did back in Germany, but those are things that tie together. When I was able to teach a cultural class at the last day, each person brought in a dish of their heritage. What was brought into place? In my case, I brought in something with rhubarb, which is a common food used in the Danish area. So you can see how there's a difference between race and ethnicity, but both are pretty important and they have an influence for social problems. Now, racial integration is tied to immigration, labor migration, and the issues of refugees, which we're facing right now, aren't we? That some of the denial of people into our country, how do we house people that are refugees, the problems in Syria and the problems that have been created in Africa, and these people without homes that were hurt. And so we look from the sociological perspective at these things, immigration, labor migration, refugees as part of the process. And we see this pattern of racial and ethnic integration. And let me pull that over a bit. We see these things that become important for us to look at sociology. That ethnocentric, believing that our own group's value is the right one for everyone. Why we need to be a melting pot and people learn what the values of those in the United States or in whatever country we are is most important. Racism is the belief that there's inferiority of certain ethnic and racial groups. In my intro class, I show a wonderful film that's in the library about race, and it has a white supremacist church that talks about the fact that the United States needs to eliminate all other racial people other than white, and that their whole purpose is to throw them out, that they're superior and smarter, that can come into place. And we already know the problems that can exist in that type of environment by looking at such things as Cambodia and the killing fields, or when we look at Africa and the slaughter of other tribes and the ethnicity problems going on. Or we can go back to World War II and the discrimination and the treatment of ethnic minorities in the form of Judaism. There, and the gypsies, the terrible things that happened to them in Russia and as well as in the German population. Then there's individual discrimination, and that's the prejudice against minority members by individual, institutional discrimination, segregation, exclusion from practice or entry into certain groups, and the expulsion of groups, and in fact throwing them out of the countries that they may be in. And we've seen this still occurring in Germany today, throwing certain populations out. We see it in our pattern of deportation in the United States, all of these things occurring. So the sociological perspective focuses on the inequalities that are based on race. And so we're looking at how people are affected in the population. And it's very important as we start to see the perspectives. Now, the functional perspective talks about how we should all blend together, that the solution is that we assimilate and the minority becomes member of that part of that dominant group and loses their individuality, that all of us should be alike, and it will allow for a smooth flow of society. We can see that in some of the ways the laws go into place. Now, the conflict theory looks at the focus on race that the dominant group may define according to their belief systems and their social class and their power, define what is right and wrong. That belief then gives them power, and we can see that, to determine, to take away some others' responsibility or their actions that they believe in. And so we see this relationships are based on power and force. We see this ethnocentrism and racism maintains the status quo into place, and will actually create laws within that process. We definitely need to look at feminist theory here. It looks at the intersection, again, of the multicultural aspects of race, language, sexual orientation, all of these things coming in together. And this look at the perspective of patriarchy and family and understanding what's going on. Interactionist perspective here says that race is a social construct. I told you we'd come back to it. Race is, so to speak, a human invention. Well, how can we say that? We know that skin tones are different, right? We know that eyes look different. but it's how we're defining it. It's the human invention. A social construct is really important to grasp in social problems because we'll talk about gender being a social construct, or sexual orientation being a social construct, that these are created by man to grasp things, to put them in categories, and to give us that background. We learn about race and we learn about ethnic categories through our social interaction, through symbols, and you're going to look at that as you proceed through this particular modules. Racial categories and identities serve as an intersection of social beliefs, and it gives us a perception and activities that are reinforced by enduring the systems and the rewards and the penalties. This is important for us to think about. How would our life be different if we were born in another race or ethnic background? Germans and even Danes tend to be very formal, and they're less huggy and kissy versus Italians. Or we could be watching My Big Fat Greek Wedding and look at that interaction and how those categories are different as we associate and explore those processes. So what we're looking at more so here in social problems are the consequences of race. Very important to think about. That race is associated with class in the United States, though it's not directly there. If you recall, when we were talking about class in the last module, I told you 50% of African Americans or blacks in this country are middle class. But the percentage that are in poverty is significantly higher. So that income and wealth that we dealt with in the last module, we need to look at that ethnic and racial discrimination that comes into place. That we know that home ownership grew greatly for the whites, and we saw other minorities denied such privilege. And we did this by something called redlining that occurred in this country. That your book goes into more. And we'll talk about that again in urbanization. Actually, one of the films you'll see within that talks about how it changed the whole perspective of neighborhoods. Consequences are the difference in education and the fight to desegregate the public education system, and the white flight that occurred when those examples occurred. Now, to avoid some of these issues, we've set up some significant laws that come into place, and that's where your focus of your discussion board this week will go. There are differences in health. Minorities are likely to receive less health care, have less coverage, and have significant problems within health care. U.S. immigration. We look at the difference of the treatment and who comes into this country. And if we look at legal immigration, we're looking at the highest percentage of outside people actually being Asian, and how they're brought in to this country and how they're treated. U.S. immigration, our book is dated on this. We have so many new immigration, and even by the time that I'm recording this, 3 weeks before you do the class, we may have changes within the immigration law again. And then we have such things that we need to talk about our response to this inequality. Affirmative action. Now, affirmative action has attempted to improve minority access to occupation and education. And it was brought on by the Equal Opportunity Act of the 1960s, when we're looking at President Kennedy, and we're then followed up by the Civil Rights Act under Johnson. And affirmative action has continued to grow and be part of our culture. It's interesting that we established the law, but the law was not highly enforced, except in certain areas. But it was actually the HR departments forcing that change. Affirmative action is there not only for race, but also for gender issues that come into place. And so we see this bold change. Affirmative action and employment required the government contractors to use affirmative action and open up doors to minorities. It required states and local governments to take formal steps to encourage employers to diversify their workforce. And it required some changes as far as schooling. Now, why did I really focus on these last 3 slides or 4 slides within the PowerPoint? Is because we're going to come back and look at your module lecture for this week. And let me move this back over as I can here and introduce you to what you're going to watch. In the beginning of this, you have a video of a girl like me, which I would like you to look at, and how we form that view of ourselves and how someone of a different race or ethnic background than ourselves may form it differently. And then you're going to be watching a video here called Beyond Black and White. Now, this is probably the oldest video you'll see in this class. It's from 1999. And as you direct link into it, you're going to see that it is a discussion that goes on. And let me just pull it into here real quickly for you. It's a mock situation of people who are fairly powerful in the country being led. I'd like you to pay attention to the people who are part of the panel and where they come from, and notice the difference of their views as they talk about the issues of affirmative action. Though this video is old in many respects, as we start looking at it being almost 15 years old, this discussion is still going on today. So some of those things as you start to explore. And finally, as you get to your module discussion today, for this module, you'll notice that you need to watch the video to come back to respond to the question that is established here. And what would you recommend we do with these issues of discrimination, and what did you find interesting in the process? So hard for me to try to keep these short, and I hope you're learning a few things from these videos as I drop them in along with your readings. Your textbook is excellent at covering the information, and what we need to do is pull that out in our discussion boards. With that said, I hope you're having a great day. Don't forget office hours. If we need to meet, we can easily do that through Skype or through FaceTime or in person or by phone, so that you stay on track. Don't fall behind on your discussion boards because those will actually be closing. Your first major project is coming up, and that's your poster, and you have that video to guide you into how to create your poster on the social problem you've chosen. Have a great day.